Hi, I'm Andy. This is Project Car Haven. Today, back working on the Mitsubishi Legnum. In the last episode, I was at the point of turning the key and hopefully getting this thing to run, and it didn't. A bit of investigating off camera found there were a few issues which I think are wiring related, but it was quite a path to follow to get to what I believe is the intended solution which should work, which is going to be replacing the engine bay wiring harness. Now all of this was neatly wrapped. I've unwrapped it because I'm trying to chase a short, or at least I think it's a short. So it almost seemed like it wasn't getting any fuel. So I set up a Noid light and then tried to start it to see if I could get this to flicker, which would indicate the signal is passing through this wiring and getting to the injector. And it worked occasionally. During that attempted demonstration, it didn't flash at all. Another thing that I was curious about is I found an issue with the wiring to these two sensors. I set the multimeter onto continuity mode. It beeps when you've got continuity or a short. These are the crank and cam sensor wiring looms. When I probe the power and ground, I'm getting continuity and resistance. Same reading and same continuity on the other sensor. I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to happen. So I haven't found any fuses blown. I've disconnected the battery and I'm still getting resistance and a reading. The only thing I could think of that might be causing a fault is somewhere there's a relay that's stuck and it's going through the coil and causing a reading without blowing a fuse. But I've unplugged all of the relays one by one. I still get that continuity. I've disconnected the wiring to the relay and fuse box here. I still get the continuity. So then I wanted to check to see whether I was getting the signal to the ECU from those sensors by probing the signal wires. I've got a pinout diagram here. So using the pinout diagram, I'm just using the multimeter as a probe to get contact on the wire. This green and red should be for the crank sensor. We get that on there, and then put a signal to the probe of a test light, then take the other end and ground it, obviously. What that'll do is it should flash if the ECU is receiving a signal from the sensor in the engine bay. So now I'm going to go and crank it. What should happen is this should flash in time with when the teeth on the gear pass the sensor, sending a signal to the ECU. Alright, so crank signal we have. Now I'm going to move that over to probe the cam sensor. I'm set up to test for that the same way. Now I don't know if it's going to actually play ball. The thing I found was when I probed the cam sensor to see if it was working, it flashed, but then it allowed the engine to almost start. Now usually when you're trying to re-demonstrate stuff for the camera, it never works out the way you want it to, but we'll give it a shot. See, it doesn't sound great, but it does start to run. And the other curious thing that it does is, as soon as I remove the earth for the probe, the car dies straight away. It's a very weird issue. I'm not an auto electrician. I can't explain it, but that's weird, right? So with the cam angle sensor in line being probed at the ECU to see if it's getting signal, allows the engine to sort of chug and run roughly for about 5 seconds and then die. If I remove the earth lead for that probe, the engine dies instantly. I've got continuity on the cam and crank angle sensor wires. It's not blown fuses. It's showing a number for the resistance, not a overloaded line. So not a complete short. It's very strange. I've probed the other harness, and even though it's not installed in the car, it doesn't have that continuity. So I've tried unplugging the ECU. I've tried removing the earths off the body. It doesn't matter. I'm still getting the continuity on those two leads. Digging into this harness to try and find it is going to be painful. I have no idea what's going on there, to be honest. If it was in a workshop, you wouldn't have a spare harness. That's where the hours then stack up to try and diagnose what's going on. I do have another harness, so I'm just going to swap them out. So that's why the engine bay is in disarray and all the interior is pulled out, because I've been testing many things. I have to pull it down even further because to get the harness out, I need to take the intake manifold off again. Among other things. I'm hoping that the harness for the automatic transmission is just taped together, because it goes through the firewall as one with the main harness. I don't believe they are combined. Hopefully not, because then I'm in another world of trouble with that. But I've got a lot to pull apart to see what I'm dealing with. So I've got my spare engine harness here. These plugs are on the inside of the vehicle, actually underneath the cubby hole or armrest. Leads up towards the stereo. These plugs here live under the stereo, fuel pump relay, etc. The ECU plug, which then runs to the firewall bulkhead cover. So I'm going to remove all of this stuff on the inside of the car so I can unbolt what's in the car and thread this out. And then I'll get this one put in and everything plugged in before I forget where it all goes. And then I'll work on the engine bay side of things. Starting from the center console, get this bin out the way. There's the plugs on the very end, leading up to the white ones underneath the stereo. ECU's down here. I'm just going to pull all this stuff out because it's going to be too hard for me to film it and do it. And I'll catch up with you in a minute. All right, another development. Before I went ahead and pulled all the wiring loom from inside the car in towards the engine bay, I thought I'll just test those plugs again. I put the multimeter on there. There's no continuity, so something I unplugged in there is causing it to fix whatever's going on with the cam and crank angle sensor wiring. And upon further research, it seems that the test light in line might be sending a false signal to the ECU, throwing out the voltages, hence allowing it to try and start. Because I'm probing right at the ECU, the signal's getting from the sensor all the way to the ECU to get to that light. Weird. Now the cam and crank angle sensors on this engine did have it running in the donor car. I haven't changed anything. It should just work. So I'm wondering if the readings are correct and I'm not understanding because I'm not an auto electrician. And here I have the whole complete other loom. I'm going to set up the multimeter on one of the plugs. It's on continuity mode. It's not beeping. I have the O2 sensor unplugged, but when I do plug it in, there's nothing else plugged in on this loom except for that O2 sensor at that point in time. The chances of the wiring being damaged in the exact same way in a separate loom, pretty close to impossible, I would think. So maybe these readings are normal and I'm just not understanding, but to me this is weird. Now I'd be curious to know to see whether anyone else's Legnum does the exact same thing. All I'm doing is changing one thing at a time to see if it makes a difference to the readings, to see if I'm finding a smoking gun here. The one thing that stayed the same was the O2 sensor. I don't have another one, so I don't think that I need one, but I've ordered it just for the sake of having a different one to plug in to test against to see if it makes a difference. And another thing I'm a bit concerned about is the ignition failure sensor. I've got the one that came on this engine that was running. I've got a brand new one which was on here before. I'm just wondering if there's an issue with that wiring that's interfering with those sensors, somehow backfeeding through the O2 sensor. I don't know. So I've ordered an IFS delete kit, which is basically a wiring loom that's going to bypass that. I won't have detonation or knock detection, but at this point, if it makes the car run, I really don't care. I've got the spare harness here again. I have a new O2 sensor to test. The probes are sitting in the cam angle sensor part of the loom that was setting off continuity when an O2 sensor was plugged in. So I'm just going to put the new one in and see if it makes a change. So no continuity. Old O2 sensor again. And the new one. Same thing. So yep, the same thing happened with the new O2 sensor, so I'm guessing that doesn't make much of a difference. Why it's reading here, I don't know. So I went ahead and installed that new O2 sensor. And the other thing I've got is a IFS delete kit. It's a wiring harness from Bayside Automotive Wiring. It goes between the crank angle sensor and the IFS. It takes that out of the loop. One of the concerns of that is the plug on the IFS doesn't look 100% good. Maybe that's causing an issue, but I'm going to put this in and see if it makes this thing run. This piece here bridges between the wiring loom and the sensor. Unplug that from there. That goes into here. That goes into there. This then runs to the loom for the IFS. And there's a fuse in here to protect the circuitry, make sure stuff doesn't catch fire. Plug in there is a bit degraded and these pins aren't sitting flush. We'll see if it makes a difference, I'm not sure. Just going to have that resting there for now. I'll strap it down if it actually works. Take that cover off just so I can monitor the fuse to see if it actually blows. Now I'll give the key a twist and see if it wants to do something. It would appear not. Okay, so recap off the top of my head of what I've done so far. All the earth points in the engine bay have been cleaned and re-strapped down. Should be making good contact. The O2 sensor thing, maybe that's normal. Did the same on both harnesses, so I don't know. Fuel pump has been replaced. The hose that also goes to the bulkhead's been replaced, so that should be good. I have proven that we've got spark, bypassed the ignition failure sensor now. We've changed the MAF sensor. I have probed the injector plugs, and they do have 12 volts of positive power to them with the key on, and it's possible that that test light is providing a back loop earth, which then helps the injectors run. I'm up my last couple of things here, which is I think the main earth wire in the ECU for the injectors isn't making good contact for whatever reason, or the ECU is no good. Now I have tried the other ECU and it behaves the same, although that is a manual ECU and not an automatic. How much of a difference that makes, I don't know. So I guess the last couple of things I'm going to bother trying are splicing in a wire to the main injector earth straight to the battery or the chassis or the engine. I'll try all three locations, or I'm going to have to buy another ECU for an automatic with active yaw control. And if that doesn't work, then I guess I'm going to ask you guys for help because I am out of ideas. So I've placed in a jumper wire straight to the injector ground on the ECU. Now the injectors are supplied with 12 volts positive power all the time, and the ECU switches the ground to activate the solenoids inside the injectors, but it needs its main earth to be able to route it back to ground, which I think might not be working. This wire is now acting like a bridge from the wire that's in the harness. Fingers crossed that this works. Well, obviously that didn't work. I went to retest spark and it seems like I've lost that too. So this is going well. Look, if any of you have any ideas of things I should try that I haven't already, please leave a comment below so I can try and get this thing running. Otherwise, I'm going to leave this one here. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one where hopefully we make this run. Fingers crossed. Cheers.